Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are racing against the clock to avert a catastrophic debt default. The Senate is taking up a debt limit fast-track plan today. And the Senate voted Wednesday to block President Biden's vaccine mandate for the private sector. 2 Democrats joined Republicans to pass a resolution. This comes as the FDA asked a judge to give it 75 years to release hundreds of thousands of documents in question, documents about the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. And we sat down with Daniel DiMartino, senior contributor at Young Voices, who witnessed firsthand Venezuela's economic collapse.
If socialism will ever come to America, it won't come through a violent event. It will come through democratic elections.
Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are racing against the clock to avert a catastrophic debt default. On Thursday, senators are considering a bill to fast-track the process that would let Democratic senators raise the debt limit ceiling without votes from Republicans. This comes before the December 15th deadline to avoid the default, which both Republicans and Democrats say would trigger financial disaster. At least 10 Republican senators need to vote with Democrats to advance the bill. A number of top Senate Republicans have signaled they will support the fast-track debt limit plan. This comes as the Senate voted Wednesday to block President Biden's vaccine mandate for the private sector. In a narrow, mostly party-line vote, the Senate passed a resolution of disapproval of the OSHA rule. That rule forces companies with 100 or more employees to require their workers to be vaccinated against COVID-19 or to test them weekly. All 50 Republicans joined Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senator Mike Brown from Indiana.
The federal government has no authority to make anyone choose between getting a vaccine and keeping their job.
They challenged the measure under the Congressional Review Act, which allows them to overturn new regulations by federal offices such as OSHA. 2 Democrats broke party ranks, Senator Joe Manchin and John Tester. A Democrat from Washington makes his case for the mandate.
So how on earth does it make sense right now to undercut one of the strongest tools that we have to get people vaccinated and stop this virus? In what world is that a good idea?
House lawmakers must vote on the resolution next. And now a hospital system based in Buffalo, New York, said it fired about 100 unvaccinated employees. That's though they were previously granted religious exemptions. With less hands on deck, Kaleida Health says it's now going to delay inpatient elective surgeries at 2 of its locations. Those are surgeries it deems non-essential. It is unclear why the exempted employees were fired. And this comes as the FDA is being sued over documents about Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. The FDA has already asked a judge for 55 years to release those documents. Now they're asking for more time. The FDA asked a judge to give it 75 years to release the hundreds of thousands of documents in question. Documents about the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. Lawyer Aaron Siri represents public health and medical professionals for transparency, the organization suing the FDA. In a blog post referring to the FDA's request, he said, "And if you find what you are reading difficult to believe, that is because it is dystopian for the government to give Pfizer billions, mandate Americans to take its product, prohibit Americans from suing for harms, but yet refuse to let Americans see the data underlying its licensure." The FDA says one of its centers keeps the records sought by the plaintiff, but only has 10 staff members. The federal agency also says they proposed 75-year schedule will allow them to respond to other information requests. If the judge were to accept their schedule, the agency would release 500 pages per month after January next year. The plaintiff wants all documents released within 108 days. And speaking of Pfizer and vaccines, Dr. Fauci said on Wednesday that the definition of fully vaccinated will change. He said on CNN it's going to be a matter of when, not if. Currently, the term fully vaccinated refers to a person who receives 2 doses of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines or the single-shot Johnson & Johnson. Fauci said the timing of the change may be linked to the ongoing cases. And now let's switch gears a bit. We attended the Heritage Foundation's event in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday called Communism's Dark Tyranny, the 30th anniversary of the collapse of the Soviet Union. While it was a celebration of the fall of the Soviet Union, it also warned that the allure of socialism is still present today, even here on U.S. soil. We sat down with Daniel DiMartino, who witnessed firsthand the collapse of Venezuela. He is now a senior contributor at Young Voices with a PhD in economics from Columbia University. He tells us his story and the differences and similarities here in America. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tiffany.
So you're from Venezuela and you have personal experience living under communism. So what was that like?
Yeah, so I was born in the same year, a month before Hugo Chavez took office. And I saw how my family went from being what would be the equivalent of an American middle-class family to being under extreme poverty by international standards. And that meant going from making thousands of dollars a month, like most Americans do today, to making less than $100 a month, to making, $2 a day. And that was a very radical change, right? It happened gradually over my childhood and my teenage years. And that got me very interested in economics. Also the fact that I had to make lines for most things to buy essential necessities or even in school, that electricity would go out and class would be canceled. Professors would dismiss class because there was toilet paper in the supermarket next door that their friends texted them. We would have a horrible shortage of, or brain drain, right? Because all the smart people or the people who were skilled, successful, wanted to leave the country and eventually leave the country. And so sometimes I just didn't have teachers for some subjects. Sometimes I would have water outages in my building for weeks, and my dad would have to ration water for the whole building because he was the president of the homeowners association, and we had a communal tank. Sometimes we collected it from the rain. Sometimes, one time we started to drill underground to try to get water from underground because there was no water from the government because they nationalized it. So it's what Venezuela was like, was going from a Western semi-developed country to becoming a total wasteland. Something that you would think was only possible in the 19th century. That's what it was like. So the reason why Venezuela is such an important example for Americans and for people around the world who live in democracies especially to know is that Venezuela did not become like this destroyed country it is today by a coup or because of a revolution or because of some sort of violent event. It happened first through democratic elections. And that's why it's so unique, because that's not what happened in Cuba or in the USSR or even in China. Those were violent events where nobody voted for those people in power. In Venezuela, people voted for Hugo Chavez in 1998. And then they voted against for him in the year 2000. And over time, the regime not only grew the power of the state and destroyed the economy, but they also cemented political power. They controlled the courts, the military, they brainwashed the people in public service, they fired their opponents in federal workers, and they started rigging the elections. And that's how they maintained power.
And so now that you're in America, what are the biggest differences and or similarities you see between America and Venezuela?
I think that there are many differences. Many of them are good, right? In America, we have something that we didn't have in Venezuela, which is a very large freedom movement. A large portion of the population who is extremely committed to preserving freedom and to upholding the founding values of this nation, which has a history that Venezuela didn't have. Right? Venezuela was a more recent democracy of only 40 years by the time Chavez got elected. America has been a constitutional republic, the oldest, the longest running current republic in existence, right? That hasn't changed the constitution or system of government radically. Over 200 years, that's incredible. But there are similarities, and that's the ideological movement that elected Chavez is present in the United States. What is that ideological movement? That is a movement based on envy. And yes, it is socialism, it is Marxism. But in America, it's manifesting in a few different ways. Yes, it is about the rich versus the poor, but because that's not a social cleavage that's enough for Marxists to take power in this country, because Americans are people that want to be better, that are entrepreneurial, that want to be rich. People want to do well in this country, want to be well off, and that's a good thing. But that also means that the Marxists have sought other ways to divide the American people to gain power, right? Because they have to get elected democratically. If socialism will ever come to America, it won't come through a violent event. It will come through democratic elections. And that will happen through, they divide us by race, they divide us by gender, they divide us, by anything imaginable, religion, with the goal of pitting all these groups against each other, forming a coalition of voters eventually that will get deceived into voting for them. And then once they're in power, the last free election in a socialist government is the first.
And so what message would you like people to walk away with? As someone who's from Venezuela now in America, what's your biggest takeaway you want people to have?
Yeah, if you are a conservative or you're someone who just believes in freedom, the best way to stop the assault on our freedoms, on our constitutional rights, is to educate your own children well. Is so that they don't fall on that trap, right? If all the conservatives in this country were able to have their children believing the same values they did, that would have all the job done for us, right? But the problem in many cases is that our own family members, the people who trust us the most and who we can persuade the most more than any other, end up falling for the socialist trap, because they are consumed by either sometimes good intentions, because they don't see a conservative alternative, which we have to present. It's our responsibility to do so, and sometimes by envy, right? That's how socialists take over. Oh, I want what the rich have. They don't deserve it. Billionaires shouldn't exist. Why? They should. Envy is a sin for a reason, because it is a natural feeling humans have, a bad one, but it is one that we have to fight. And the only way to fight is by teaching people how to do it. And that can only come from the home and from the family.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Tiffany.
And now, before we end, a new telescope to unravel the mysteries of black holes. It's called X-ray astronomy. Early Thursday morning, NASA launched its Imaging X-ray Polarimetry Explorer mission, or IXPE, to measure X-rays released by black holes and neutron stars. It's the first space observatory of its kind. Scientists say IXPE will tell them more about cosmic X-ray sources than they can learn by studying their brightness and color spectrum, which will help them test and refine theories of how the universe works. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.